Hello, friends, and welcome to the InterWorld Podcast, where we explore the intersection of personal and collective transformation. My name is Yasha S. Wagner, and I'm a PhD researcher in the field of psychology, well-being, and spirituality, as well as a founder of the InterWorld Institute for Inner World Peace. You can learn more about our nonprofit initiatives by going to interworld.org. Today I have the great pleasure and great honor of speaking with a dear old friend and in many ways a mentor, Ixchel Prisma. Ixchel is an incredible musical artist as well as a student of the intertribal path who has been guiding healing work for about 14 years. She's traveled all over the world and studied many different cultural traditions and arts, and will be sharing with us today about those aspects of life, as well as the initiation of motherhood, parenting, living in community, and so on. So I couldn't be more excited. Without further ado, here's our interview with Ixchel Prisma. Hi, Ixchel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Yasha. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. It's great to have you on. How are you feeling today?
Feeling great. It's a beautiful fall day here in the Catskills. Lots of colors and crispness.
Yeah, I remember one of the times that you were visiting our community out here in Colorado in recent years. You shared how you always the gist I picked up from what you shared was that you always prefer when a conversation can have depth and authenticity and meaning, and not just be chatter and casual. Hey, I'm fine. How you doing? And moving on. So my hope for today is that we can have a chance to dive in deeper beyond the surface and learn more about you and your work and your life journey, and share at that level of authenticity. So that's my hope for the conversation.
Thank you. I would love that. Thank you for your curiosity in that.
Yeah. So I know that, many people like myself have been very inspired and impressed by your creative artistry, your healing work, and so on. And we'll ask all about that. But first, I know the bio doesn't always paint a full picture. So I'm curious if you could share kind of the highlights of your journey, and in terms of your purpose and your mission, what your main kind of meditation is these days about that life process that we're living here.
Sure, I will do my best. Thank you. It's a big ask. Like, how do you crystallize all that? But I'll start by saying that I feel, at the core of me is creativity, is art, and the beauty way. And so I feel like that's a big, gemstone or cornerstone of my mission, is allowing myself to be a vessel for the muse, the cosmic creative force, to move through me, and in however many ways I can do that. Music, art, writing, cooking, creating spaces, all of these things, and the exploration of finding new ways to do that as the path evolves. So I've had the blessing of having that aspect of myself nurtured from a really young age. I was raised by a very creative mother and father who really encouraged the arts, the expression. I studied over a decade in musical theater, in dance, in choral composition, choir, vocal, singing, all of the things, art, and so I feel like that was kind of a really powerful foundation for me. The other thing that really sticks out to me about how my foundation was composed was it was a lot based in spirit and in faith. It was a religious upbringing, but I think beyond like the structure of any one particular religion was the core just connection to spirit. Um, and so I feel that early on in my path, there was a weaving and interconnection of those two things, the creative force and the creative expression, um, digging into something deeper than just a superficial process, which in reality, most art and most creative energy is intrinsically like that. But I guess like the beauty way in terms of like using creativity to connect to spirit or connect to the divine. And yeah, once I kind of went through the process of my childhood, my adolescence, and into my adult years, I honed in on that. I started writing and creating my own music. I started studying different sacred traditions, expanding my connection beyond just one religion, but understanding kind of the universal principles that are woven through many different traditions, and found a beautiful dharma that kind of weaves all of that together in a really good way, and that's really in service to helping people become in contact with those parts of themselves to uplift and raise consciousness, to connect to healing, to do whatever work needs to be done for each individual to walk their path as well and connect to the sacred in whatever way they can. So my music, my art, my healing work, my path is all in devotion to that, to just connecting to the divine and all the aspects of it.
Something that the reflection of beauty way, but going into depth rather than the surface level beauty brings up for me when I'm listening to you is related in psychology, and the kind of psychology I study, which is called depth psychology, as opposed to the more conventional approaches. There's this emphasis on meaning, making meaning out of challenges that we face in life. And so this was just coming up for me as I was listening to you, is like, what creates beauty isn't always just what's pleasant or comfortable or easy. Sometimes, like, the incredible poetic beauty of life in the universe is from those difficulties that we encounter and from the challenges and the discomforts that we face, creating meaning and learning and transformation, like extracting the essence of those parts of our experience is actually what creates that contrast and dynamism and beauty, right? So I just wanted to reflect that. And I know that you were also sharing with me about the challenges of going through different changes around your own experience of what your mission is over time as you grow in community and motherhood and so on. And so I wanted to just invite that as well. If there's anything that you could share as insights for those of us that, it seems like everyone's on a quest to find out who they are and what they're here to do. And maybe sometimes we have ideas about what that looks like, but perhaps it goes through changes over time. And so I'm curious if you have any advice or insights on that topic in terms of your own experience with how your mission has changed and grown over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general it's a tricky thing, to be invited on a podcast and talk about who you are and what you do, because automatically I'm presenting an identity. I'm presenting, and it's like that whenever we meet each other, for the first time, or on platforms like this, you say, "Oh, well, like, what do you do for a living?" or "Who are you?" or like, "What's your mission? What's your vibe?" And most people will give an answer that is a title. Well, I'm an artist, I'm a teacher, I'm a builder, I'm a construction worker, all of these titles, these I'm this. And on one level, it is important, it's helpful for the ego to have that kind of structure, right? We need to have an understanding of what it is that we're bringing forth and put some sort of verbalization to it to ground it into reality. But what I've seen kind of like over time in learning and studying kind of the deeper, just the path, is that it can also hinder us, and there's like a really beautiful question that our teacher likes to bring into our meditation, which is like, who am I without my mask? Who am I without my identity? Because when we present ourselves, we wear those masks, right? I'm wearing the mask of a musician, I'm wearing the mask of an artist, I'm wearing the mask of a mother, I'm wearing the mask of a healer or ceremonial leader, or all these different masks that are layering on top of each other, like what I'm doing, but like, who am I without that? And there was an experience that I had like on the path where I had like kind of a choice that felt really substantial to me. I've collaborated with a couple of different musicians, and also presented some of my own music. Like back in my 20s, I was kind of more in the like public eye, I would say, releasing my own music and going performing at different festivals and different gatherings. And there was a point where there was like kind of a window where I was going into something that like I could have started touring, and I could have started like really taking that into a more serious place. And it was right around the same time when I started studying the healing path on a deeper level. And it was clear to me that I had to kind of make a choice, to take this like very external, public facing, like, full expression of that realm, out into the world, or go in and kind of like hunker down into the study, into the practice, into the refinement, into the cultivation. And in order to do that, I had to really put down that mask, of like, oh, but this is who I am, and like, this is my name, and maybe people kind of know me, and like all the things that the ego wants to bring into the equation. And it was right around the time of my Saturn returns when all this happened, which anybody who's familiar with astrology, Saturn is about restriction. It's about it's like the energy of like controlling time and measurement, and like discipline, and creating structure and rigidity and a foundation. And when the Saturn returns in somebody's chart, it's a moment to evaluate what it is that we're initiating ourselves into, and where is our discipline in there. And it's a lot of cutting ties with things that are distracting us from maybe our deeper purpose or our deeper study. And it was right around that moment that I had made the choice to kind of drop out of the more public facing performer arena and move it into something that felt more I guess like undercover in a way. But for me had a deeper and richer connection. And I want to say it is for me, because I'm not saying that anybody who's a musician and who's presenting their music publicly and going and playing and touring, that's not deep. That is like definitely a very deep dharma as well. But I guess just for me, like there was a moment when it was like, well, I could be that and I am that, but like what else is there?
Yeah, it sounds like, and just to be clear so that we're all on the same page, you're talking about essentially being like a performer that's gaining some notoriety and recognition for your music, and now you have this choice to focus more on the spiritual inner work, and as a facilitator and as a healing practitioner, right? And so there's this way that you went deeper into your studies with traditions of initiation and personal inner work, helping people through their own healing process and so on. And that took a lot of sort of discipline, it sounds like, in the Saturnian sense, to prioritize that over the performative side of your artistry and creativity that had been growing at the time, is kind of what I'm hearing. And I guess I just want to point out a few things here. One is that it really brings up the word sacrifice a lot, for me. And sacrifice, of course, as many people know, means to make something sacred. Which I think is really interesting. And also when we hear sacrifice, a lot of times when we're thinking of some ancient indigenous empires and so on, that idea is like has this dark connotation to it of like sacrifice on the altar. But what if it was always also including this metaphorical meaning of like sacrificing something we're attached to on the altar place of what really matters? And ultimately that's like the biggest sacrifice of all is our ego, our identity, right? It's like, what does it look like to let that ego attachment of who we think we are fall away? And that's like the ultimate ego sacrifice there. And then that makes the person sacred, perhaps, in their duty and service in the world. So that's definitely what your share brings up for me. And it also, you mentioned motherhood as another role we can play, which makes me think of how children, they seem to have a little bit less of that mask developed. And so they're just much more, maybe they're the answer in some ways to that question of who are we without the mask, is like, we're like children when we take the mask off, because it's more of a blank slate. They're less roles that we're taking seriously. It's almost like kids pretend to play roles, but they know it's all make-believe, whereas we pretend to take roles, but we're totally bought into them and think they're real. Maybe you would know better as a mother, but I guess how is your observation of children and being around kids in your community and as a parent informed this contemplation for you of questioning identity, and how's that like played into the whole process around doing your work in the world? I'm curious about that in terms of parenting. Yeah,
I had this experience like 2 years before we conceived our son, where I was in a process where I was like struggling with my music because I felt like I wasn't like bringing things through in the way that I used to. Like it'd been a long time since I'd written a song, and I was like not really feeling connected when I would sing, and I wasn't singing my own songs. And there's like this process. And I remember going to my teacher and like asking him for help and being like, expressing this process. Like I'm just having trouble connecting and I don't feel like I'm one with my art, and I had expected him to kind of like give me this blessing to like reconnect me back to my magic, there was like this hope that he would be like, okay, like this is what you need to do to get back to it. And instead he was like, well, maybe you're not a musician. And I was just like crushed. I was like, wait, what? Like my whole reality, like... And then he said, maybe you're much more than that. Maybe you're an amazing chef. Maybe you're an amazing coordinator. Maybe you're a mother. And that really was liberating in a huge way. This is what like kind of the essence of like that concept of like, who am I without that mask, is like sometimes those things can be really limiting when we just like say, this is who I am and this is what I do and that's it. And we box ourselves into something that prevents us from connecting with all the other gifts and dharma that we have on this planet, and all of the facets of the work that we have. And I think that was a huge part of why I felt resistant to becoming a mother for a long time, is because there was this fear of losing myself, and losing my connection to what I'm cultivating. And I remember it was during that moment that my husband Jerry was actually in a vision quest, and he was on the mountain for 10 days. He was praying for vision. He came back down, still hadn't really had clarity, and it was like in that moment that I was receiving that teaching from our teacher that he had his vision. And it was a little child came up to his instrument and started playing his instrument right in front of him, and he was like, "Oh, okay, this is what's next for us." And when we spoke about bringing a child through, neither of us have had really wanted like strongly to like have kids. It wasn't something that felt like it was on our agenda, like since we were little. Oh, I wanted a baby, this and that. But we both kind of came to this point in our lives where we realized, like, if we want to go deeper on the path and really, really be in service and really understand like what it is to go through all of these life processes, we need to initiate ourselves into the process. And we sat together and we talked about all the things that we would sacrifice through that. And a big part of it was our time to create art and our time to do what we already know how to do really well, and continue to learn and do those things. And it was like this process of being like, we need to take all of that off. We need to like strip that away and stop being attached to that being our only reality, so we can create the space for something else to come through. And we called our teacher, like, this little guy, this little baby that came through us, specifically we said, like, we're calling in the being that is going to teach us what we need to know next. And, with that process, there was a lot that came through actually during my pregnancy. I started writing music again. Jerry and I recorded an entire album while I was like 7-8 months pregnant and released it. And we hadn't done that like our whole relationship, so it was kind of
Wow.
ironic in that way. It was like
Mm-hmm.
it made space for a new energy to freshen things up. And then a lot of other things that weren't creative came through, that like he kind of started learning practical skills around the house and like how to fix things and build things. And like I started like focusing on organizing my reality to fit in a new being. And then when our son came, um anybody who is a parent knows the like divine ego crushing paradigm splitting reality that is, in all of its beauty, in all of its chaos, in all of it, like the full spectrum. um but I really did consciously put aside my identity of like having to practice music, having to write anything. Like, it was a conscious like, no, I'm going to create space for this new part of myself to emerge. And like I would have friends and family be like, "Oh, it must be so hard. Like you kind of lost yourself. You're not doing your music and you can't go out and do your work. Like, what a big sacrifice, and it must be so difficult." And like, yes, definitely there are moments of that, but my approach to it was like, no, this is a choice that I'm making in this moment to take on a new teacher. And this little baby is my new teacher. And like, I'm initiating myself into a whole different practice in this time. And yes, I will consciously and willingly put those things aside, because I don't want to be attached to those things as like my only way to know myself. And through the willingness to make space for something new and to devote ourselves to something so entirely, I mean, we can get to know ourselves so much deeper. And there's like so many purifications and lessons and like beautiful unfoldings that of course are gonna extend into the rest of my life now because of that decision to like make space to be a mother. And I've just had a lot of beautiful reflections from people like saying how it's changed me and rounded me and made me more whole and more dimensional. And the music has come back, and I've started writing again. I've started bringing some other things through, and I can feel the difference in what's there. There's a depth there, and it adds to it. And yeah, so I mean, that's like the side of the motherhood. As far as kids themselves, it's interesting because every day I'm having to teach him how to identify with himself. Kids don't come in with the ability to understand and differentiate the difference between him and me. Like babies, infants, they don't understand that the mother is separate from them. They think that they're the same being and the same thing, and then we teach them, like, your name is Makoa, my name is Mommy or Ixchel, that's your daddy, that's this person, that's that, and start to create that separation, which on one level is a necessity for this polar world we live in, and for the ego to do its work in a healthy and proper way. And then on the other hand, like leaving that space for him to be whatever, to not box himself in. There was one time we asked him the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, Makoa? And he said, I want to be a master. And both Jerry and I were like, wait, I didn't even know he knew that word. And then I was like, well, a master of what? He's like, no, just a master. And that's the only time we've ever asked him the question, and that was the answer we got.
Wow.
So it's very curious to see, like, what does that mean? Like, what is that identity process? And like, I feel that what we come in with as children, like, there is already an intrinsic indication of our path and of our dharma. And a lot of people who say, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this world, one thing I could recommend is, like, go back and ask your parents, like, what were you super into when you were a kid? What were your, like, natural innate tendencies? What did you gravitate towards? Because a lot of times there's a clue there in what that mission is for us, because it hasn't been distracted or tainted or moved around yet. It's in purity.
Yeah, this is a really, really good answer that I'm really grateful for, because it actually deconstructs some of the oversimplification I was doing. I was, suggesting that we need to become like little kids, and there may be some truth or wisdom in that approach. But you're pointing out, as a mother, two really, really important things. And one is that kids might already have this like archetypal blueprint or seed in their soul of what they're meant to become, which is really important and beautiful to honor, that they're not necessarily just a blank slate. They might have all kinds of their own karma and dharma and unique personality and so on that they're already coming in with. And maybe reconnecting with our inner child is not just becoming a blank slate, but getting back to that underlying soul code of what we're like blueprinted as a seed to blossom into.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's valuable. Were you going to add something?
Well, I just feel, intuitively, I've always felt that, like, nothing is random, nothing is by chance. And like, we signed up for the assignment of incarnating, in this lifetime, in this body. And so when kids come in, it is like that. They bring their own bundle. And as a parent, we like, I know that because I can feel it in the way that just the energy of the being in our field changed certain things, and like new energies or new like things coming in. And so I definitely resonate with that like, it's we bring a mission before, like, we already like agreed to it before we came in. That's just my like my inner understanding of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of the spiritual path is about reconnecting with that soul level of who we are that transcends any particular incarnation, so that we can take, because we talk a lot about responsibility on the spiritual path, but there's a whole nother level of responsibility that I think comes with realizing that we're on a soul level choosing even to be here at this time in a broader sense, right? And so what are we here to do? And that's deep. I really want to highlight these other points you're making about maturation, because kids, practically speaking, need to begin to differentiate things and have an ego so that they can function in this world. And I want to highlight, even from like an alchemical perspective, that differentiation and separation of the ego, I feel, is crucial for us to even be able to have any conscious like wholeness and oneness. We talk a lot about oneness, but a mature conscious form of connection and wholeness comes from things already being differentiated, rather than just a totally like unconscious immature version of oneness where it's all just automatically merged the way that kids are. And so there's like a unconscious oneness, and then a differentiation, and then a coming back to wholeness and interdependence that we grow into over time. And somewhat ironically or magically, it sounds like you as the parent are going through a whole nother stage of that same maturation process when you have the child, because you're then having not just to sacrifice your ego, but do that out of like an honoring of the importance of something or someone else, and like needing to take care of them and serve their need. And that I'm understand to be extremely maturing. Like you said, how much it changes you. That's what you said while you were speaking. And that really stood out to me, because this focus on transformation in the podcast, it's like, well, how does that change someone? How does that transform someone? And I think the answer is that when they make a sacrifice in honor of something or someone bigger than the limits of their own identity and preferences, then they mature. Like they really grow up at that point, into that interdependence, rather than just the independence. Like the hyper independence of the teenager becomes the dependability of an adult that's there to like help take care of others too.
Yeah, and there's also like an aspect of like, if a parent is conscious in their approach to the initiation, it's very similar to the initiatic disciplines of yoga, or of meditation, all of these things like pratyahara, the mastery over the senses. Like, you want to have a nice quiet morning and you want to wake up and meditate and drink your tea, and then there's a little being screaming in your face, and all of a sudden he's kicking your head, and then he's running around and stomping all over the floor and ripping the curtains down. And like, are you gonna like flip out and totally like go into some crazy state, or are you gonna approach it as a student who's learning to master their reactions, master their senses, not let the outside world and the input of all of that affect their inner peace? And so much of the day-to-day experiences, of being a parent is really putting those types of practices to the test. And that's why pairing like a cultivation of practices in these things like yoga and the disciplines of cold water immersion, for instance, or meditation, or like being able to stay up when you want to go to sleep, these types of things, like then it becomes a whole nother depth and level of like, I would even say like like an enjoyable challenge in a way, where you're like, okay, let's see how my practices do in real life. I want to go to sleep. I just slept for 30 minutes and now I'm up again. And now the kid just fell asleep, but I can't fall asleep. And now I finally fell asleep, and then the kid woke up again. Okay, so I got a total of like 3 hours last night. Good to go. And
Yeah.
I just think back on my training. I'm like, thank the Lord, I spent so many nights awake
Yeah.
praying, and going through that process, because it makes it digestible.
Yeah. So you're reassuring us that having kids is just as fun and relaxing as jumping in an ice bath at 5 a.m. That's what I'm
Exactly,
getting. Okay.
exactly. And we have a saying in the tradition, which is suffer ahead of time. And that's what the practices are for. That's why there's rigidity within the disciplines, whatever spiritual practices that people take on, whether they're from, the Eastern traditions and the yogic traditions, or whether they're from the shamanic traditions and, the Americas. It's a lot of them are pretty rigorous and pretty grueling, because when we put ourselves consciously into that place, then when it comes up in our everyday life, we have the ability to work with it in a good way. And and
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, see the sacred in it.
Mm-hmm.
Approach it as a practice, approach it as a ritual, approach it as something that's sacred, that's a teaching that's coming for us, instead of being a victim or becoming an automatic, because we have that training already, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What you just said reminds me a lot of something that I heard another old friend and mentor say, Roman Hannes from Paititi Institute in Peru, who's actually has kids and is teaching a family workshop here in a week. It'll already have gone by when this is released. But he said when I lived down in Peru, he used to say that the suffering of life is pretty inevitable and maybe there's no shortcut around it, but the only shortcut he knows of is to engage voluntarily
Mm-hmm.
instead of resisting, right? So it's like the only shortcut through the discomforts of life maybe to engage voluntarily rather than trying to get out of it. And I think that's very similar to what you're saying, especially about the victim mentality, in the sense that what makes any seemingly painful, difficult experience into a positive challenge instead of like a suffering and a pity party is our attitude about it and how we engage and how we deal with it. So yeah, important stuff. I want to circle back to the irony of the creativity that was unleashed through your pregnancy and the sacrifice, and what you shared about our teacher naming that maybe you're not a musician. So I think we'll do a little spiraling weave here, because I want to go into that creative process aspect of things a bit more, and then we'll come back to the community and parenting at the end. I love that you called it ironic, because it's almost like when you had to sacrifice, like set limits and sacrifice something like your being a musician. The way it sounded is like you were describing actually sacrificing the limitations and the limited identity. So it actually was like a sacrifice into something that was more limitless and unleashed. And it even, this is pretty random, but it reminded me of something that a comic book writer, Grant Morrison, said at a conference that I loved when I was a teenager, where he talked about like the wisdom of multiple personalities. We think of it as a disorder, but what if we could play different roles and not be stuck in one or another? And I've always loved that, of like, being able to change hats and kind of morph into different versions of ourselves for different moments. And there's something really enriching about that irony, that you weren't actually letting go of being a musician. You were just like remembering that you could become so many more different things also at the same time. And you weren't just a musician, you were also a parent, or, Jerry started learning more construction or whatever it might be. So maybe we can go back, and anything you want to add on this topic, feel free, but maybe we can go back to the music if you're ready, because I know that you have some albums out, you have some collaborations, you have a lot of amazing creative work out there. And I believe last time you were here, you also wanted us to hold you accountable to your plans to keep creating more.
Mm-hmm.
There was a next plan. So that's this part of the podcast, is the creativity reminder. So
Mm.
anything you want to mention, and then I'll ask some more specific questions about it. But yeah, where are you at with the creative process now? And also, we'll share some samples of your music when we release this. But anything you can share for people that want to connect with your art and your music. Yeah, just to introduce people to that side of things.
Well, thank you for holding me accountable. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely appreciate the nudges. Um, at this moment, there there's a lot. I think like one of the key words that like I'm feeling is like authenticity, and like wanting, like, I always try to be authentic with my music, but wanting to create a sense of like you're in the room with me. And a lot of like my training and my emphasis like up until this point has been like a lot of production, working with some like electronic things, and I really love that. I mean, for me, like producing in that hybrid is really fun and explorative. And also I've been feeling like a sense of like wanting to just have something that feels accessible, that is a little bit more pared down, like even bringing back some of my songs from my like original albums and producing like more acoustic versions, creating more like live sense of like collaborations, like live creations. And then working also with uh I mean, I have like definitely a whole set of songs that I've been carrying around in my pocket that haven't been released at all. Um, and they've come through like, in the past 5-6 years. I think that's how long it's been since I released an album, maybe even longer. It's probably been like 7 or 8 since I released one of my own albums. And so, it's, I think as an artist, it's always about like finding the time and the discipline to just sit down and do it and like get out of my own way. um and yeah, so I've set aside some time this winter to make that happen, make it a reality, and create a little bit more of a simplified approach, and done a lot of study on like the kind of the direction and the vibe that I'm hoping to go in, and explore a little more. uh,
Mm.
but one thing that's been fulfilling for me is also taking my gifts and what I have learned and using them to be in service to others. Because a lot of times as artists, we get into like, oh my gosh, my creations, and like what's coming through me, and what's the message that I want to share with the world. And I'm saying it in this almost like exaggerated way because like it can become exhausting. There's a lot of pressure there. There's like this feeling of like, who am I, and what am I doing, and all these things. And one of the like foundations and the cornerstones of our tradition is service, and remembering that our gifts are given to us to be of service to others as well. And so I've had the really beautiful process and opportunity in the past like year and a half to be a producer for other people's music. And that's been really cool because I didn't realize that I had the skills to be able to like be at that level of being a producer. And I was like, you know what, just try it. Just see what happens. You learn as you go. And that's exactly what's been happening. I'm working with a sister who is a very talented children's musician and storyteller. And it feels really fulfilling to be able to draw upon a lot of the training that I received in my childhood and adolescence, working with musical theater, working a lot with, um, the concept of like Broadway production and like creating like these elaborate storylines and these complex arrangements that come together to create like a full experience. And applying that in such an innocent way that like the sky's the limit because it's for a child and we're all children, on the inside. And like you have full permission to be goofy, you have full permission to be like, off to the left field, all of the things, to be like, it's very
Yeah.
liberating. And it's taught me a lot. I've learned a lot like technically about production, and just gotten back into writing in a different way. So it's been a really beautiful explorative process. So that's one thing I'm actually pretty excited about that's coming up is it's a score for a TV show, basically. And it's called Imagination. And the sister, her name is Ama Unicorn. So it's a little bit of a play on words there. So I would like to do more stuff like that as well, I think. And this is kind of like maybe a shout out if like people are looking for a producer. Like that to me has been very fulfilling work. And it's something that I'm curious to explore more of, you know, because it's not all about me. And of course I have music that I want to share with the world, and I need to like hunker down and do it, and like don't make too many excuses or get myself too distracted. But also I really want to be in service to others and like help others actualize their music and their inspirations and their art, and that's feeling really good to me right now. And so that's
Wow.
kind of what's coming in.
That's really fun. It's really funny to me, these moments on my podcasts unexpectedly where someone has some service and they're mentioning it to my audience, and I'm realizing, oh, I'm interested in that as I listen. So we'll see. But it piqued my interest because I'm also going through a big transmutation with my music, which I haven't released any of in a very long time, and wanting to change it from like what I used to do with hip hop into something new and different, in a similar way to what you described. So it'd be funny to think about what the production looks like for that. I just told Jerry a couple of days ago that I got a loop station for the first time, so now I'm going to be learning how to use that. And yeah,
Nice.
we'll see what happens. Anyways, I feel like we're doing sort of a whole recapitulation and moving backwards in time through this episode, which I want to actually keep doing because you've mentioned the difference between what you're leaning into now and what you've done in the past. And I want to make sure we highlight what you have done in the past and just share with the audience in case they don't know. I mean, I know you have still, even if you've made all these sacrifices, thousands and thousands of us big fans out here, monthly people listening to your music all the time, several albums out, collaborations with mutual friends and artists like Liquid Bloom, who we might invite to the podcast as well, and so on. So maybe you could share a little bit about what your music has been in the past, some of the more produced versions and the different experiments you've already done, and what that's been all about, just so we have a bit of context there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll just give honor and recognition and gratitude and shout out to some of the artists that I've had the pleasure to collaborate with. Liquid Bloom and Desert Dwellers, Shaman's Dream, Alia, Ataya, Planewalker. I'm trying to think if there's others. Forgive me if I've forgotten you. And all of those have shaped me in a really deep way. It's been really beautiful to understand. And I've actually learned production from a lot of the people that I worked with just by sitting and watching how they're recording me and how they're doing what they're doing. And then, I have a couple of albums that I produce. I always give a lot of honor and deep gratitude to Alex King Harris, Rara Avis, who's one of the original members of Desert Dwellers. And he was my producer and my teacher on my first album, Full Spectrum Medicine. We had a really beautiful experience where I flew him to the big island of Hawaii, and we got an Airbnb and hunkered down for about 6 weeks and produced Full Spectrum Medicine within those 6 weeks. And during that time, he would sit next to me. I would sit next to him and I would tell him, okay, I want it to sound like this. Let's figure out this. And he would just have me watch what he was doing, how he was picking sounds, how we were bringing things in. We would kind of curate it together with him, like pressing all the knobs and the buttons. And then he would be like, all right, your turn, you drive. And then I got to learn, firsthand through that process, production. And in that process, I invited him to work on my second album with me, and he was able to do a few things, but the timing didn't align for us to have that same sort of experience. And it forced me into empowering myself to produce my own album. So the second album, Soul Codes, is mostly my production. And so it's a good journey for me of understanding, just what it takes and a learning curve. That album, in all transparency, didn't come out exactly how I was hoping or how I wanted to. And I think that's kind of the artist's struggle, is that it's never perfect, it's never done, it's never this or that exactly, or the vision. And at some point you just have to let it go anyway, right? And let it be what it is, and know that you can always create something different, as you grow and as you learn. Yeah, and so those are kind of like the things. And then of course I created a new collaboration with my husband Jerry. Our project is called Soma Frequency, and we have one album that's out that we did in that kind of like spirit of like, let's be spontaneous, let's do this in one take, let's make it feel live, let's let the mistakes be there, like let's just create the energy of like, you're in the room with us and this is not about it being perfect, it's from our heart. And so that's kind of like the approach I want to come from, but bringing in all of the technical skills, all the things I've learned. And, I will say that like, it's hard for me to understand that there's so many people that know my music that I don't know, because I'm not out there. A lot of people who, have thousands of followers are out there connecting with their fans, connecting with their listeners. And like I shared in the beginning, I had made that conscious choice to kind of like get under the radar, because the offering that I wanted to create was more intimate, was in a different modality. And, I question every day, like, what would it be like, and sometimes I get on the stage, you'll see me there maybe like once a year, twice a year.
Heartfire Festival, something like
Yeah.
that.
But I do, I do want to honor and acknowledge like all those people out there that do listen to the music and that do connect with it, because, the prayer is always that this medicine is going where it's needed, and that it's touching in a way that's deeply felt and understood. And I know that it's getting to the people who need it, and that those people are utilizing it in the context that they need to utilize it within their, their framework of their lives and their ceremony and their process and whatever that is. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be one of those artists that goes out and just like does the tours and is on all the stages and things like that. And I will just say that like, I'm accessible in a different way. And, for those that want to go into that kind of space, like there's a connection there that, you can reach out and find us here and there throughout the world in that way. But I do appreciate having the technology of all these music platforms to make the message and the art accessible on a wider scale where I can't physically be. That really is a special feeling, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's also the ones that you can't even track electronically, let alone by touring. Because when you and I first met, 10 years ago now, I bought Full Spectrum Medicine, your first album. And back then I was on tour. I was driving around in my car. And I said this last time you were here. I used to pop your CD in the CD player and listen to it cross country. And I loved that album. I loved listening to it just about on CD back then. So there's definitely still, people connecting with the music in many different ways. And I noticed last time that you and Jerry came out to do a sound bath in Colorado Springs, somebody local came up to you at the end of the sound bath, and I heard them mention, I've been listening to your music for a long time, big fan, so glad to see it in person. So, definitely gets out there. And then people who want to listen can find Ixchel Prisma, all of those 3 albums online, and Soma Frequency. And I'm excited to find out what the next projects will be called once you share them.
Me too.
Yeah. And I guess I want to lean in with the little bit of time we have left to the contrast here, because with Dream Seed and the community in New York, you guys work a lot with traditional healing music. And I know that's a big part of your work, guiding healing practices and retreats. And so I just want to, for starters, as a segue, invite you to reflect a little bit and compare and contrast that kind of difference and similarity with the totally artistic, creative process of making original music. What's that process like, and any insights around that as compared to traditional healing songs and sound healing and so on?
Mm. Well, the tradition that I'm studying under the intertribal path is a very intentional weaving of many different cultures that are brought together. It was brought about by a group of elders in the 80s that made the conscious decision, like, we need to create a rainbow bridge. We need to create a connection and a weaving of our traditions so that we preserve our knowledge and that we, we're able to fortify and unify. And so, we've had the blessing and the privilege to be able to receive direct transmissions from many indigenous elders from all over, Tito La Rosa, many different musicians from Africa, from India, from North America, from Central America, and not only their music, but their lineage, the reason behind the music, the practice, the prayers, the energies. I went into a very deep study in Peru with the Shipibo tradition, where the whole way that they perform their healing modalities is through sound and through song. So that insight has really prompted me to dig deeper in, like, the intention of what what we're doing with sound, what we're doing with the song as prayer. And there's a purpose for what we create, and whether it's coming from our own personal experience or informed by the elements and the spirits and the energies around us and within our environment. It's all, there's a technology to it that's really beyond words, and very deep, very beautiful, but also very simple. And just connecting with that, like, that universal vibration. And so, yeah, it's been a big blessing and a privilege. When I first started on this path, like, I had taught myself guitar, and I think that was kind of like the only instrument that I kind of knew how to play semi well. Maybe the charango a little bit from my studies in Peru. And through working with Dream Seed, which is a sound healing collective, and doing the work with all of these different traditions, I've picked up over 15 different instruments, many of which don't require singing at all, many of which are just focusing on sound vibration and the power of just like a simple a simple hit of a gong, or the simple, breath through the flute, or all these different ways that sound and vibration can work. And that informs how I want to create, because it expands the palette. It's like when you're an artist and you're working with like a couple of colors, and then all of a sudden you get like all these new colors that you can put on the palette. It's the same sort of thing.
Mm.
So yeah, it's just
Mm.
it's a beautiful study, and I, I feel like there's a lot more to be said, but I would have to like I would have to be asked like a specific question.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that we can always have you back on the podcast and map out some more detailed interviews on each one of these themes. But this is a nice overview for now. And I wanted to actually um, kind of transition into not just the musical aspect, but just like there's these more traditional universal approaches to sound as a healing technology beyond just your original albums that are out there. There's also a whole plethora of healing and transformational technologies that you work with beyond just the sound and the music. And so this includes spiritual disciplines and practices, and working with the plant world and nature spirits and so on, sacred herbs. And So I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit about what you have learned in your 14 years of guiding healing work with these transformational practices, and what kind of insights for someone who is maybe somewhat familiar, but is looking to just like get some wisdom from your experience of facilitating and practicing so much with these holistic healing approaches. Anything other than the music that you feel is like essential in that healing work that you would share with us? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the mystery of the definition of healing, right? What is healing?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think like to be healed from something, it means it has to go away or we have to get rid of it. And, what I've come to understand is healing is not that we get rid of something, it's that we transform our relationship to it. Like, kind of like you said, we're willingly participating, in the experience, whether it's suffering or, any other thing that comes up through that process. And I think at the heart of this work, like the essence of the spiritual path, in my experience, it all comes down to our relationships, the way that we relate with everything in existence, and how we care for those relationships, and how we can bring more balance and more care and more equanimity to the relationships that we are within. A lot of people, when they hear the word relationship, they think about your partner or your intimate, your significant other, your children, your parents, your family, your friends. It is all of that, but so much more. We are in relationship with the foods that we take into our body, with the water that we bathe ourselves with and drink, with the fire that we cook with, that we warm ourselves with the air that we breathe, with the earth that we walk upon. We're in relationship with all of the plants that we use to alter our consciousness or heal our bodies or activate our different chemistries and bring us energy or help us relax. We're in relationship with the cars that we drive, with the bridges that we drive across, with the microphone that we talk into, with the computers and the crystals in the computers that, access all the information. We're in relationship with the stars and the cosmic energies. We're in relationship with all of the different microorganisms that live in the soil and in the forest and inside of our bodies. We're in relationship with ourselves and our higher selves and our souls. We're in relationship with our ancestors, those people that aren't even in this plane. We're in relationships with the archetypal guides and the deities. I could go on and on and on and on and on. But really, when we start to put into perspective that everything that we do is a reflection of our relationships, we can start to see where are those things out of balance, where are those things creating toxicity or blockages, where are those things needing more attention, where do I need to simmer down on some form of relating, where am I using something as a vice, where am I relating too much and taking something into my body too much, where am I not paying attention, what could use more care, in what relationship could I use more curiosity, more openness. The questions can go on and on. And so for me, like, that's what the healing work comes down to, is that we are bringing balance to how we relate to everything. And that includes our stories, right? When we talk about healing, it's usually we're healing from something that happened to us in the past, or healing from something that's currently happening to us in this present. And what story are we telling ourselves about that thing, you know? And is that bringing us into empowerment, or are we becoming victims to it? And I think like ultimately there's a the mindset of being curious and exploring where is the gemstone in every experience, in every relationship, because nothing is by chance. Everything has a purpose, everything has a technology and a design for our path and for our awakening, for our consciousness. And so creating the mind of a student, a mind of somebody who is curious to understand more, to know what is the lesson, curious to learn, from whatever it is that is the experience, and using a story that empowers us to, reflect that, and being open to changing the story about what it is that is happening to us or has happened to us.
Yeah. Wow, that was so beautiful. Thank you for
Mm.
sharing about the interrelatedness of everything, and the intelligent design of this multidimensional, totally interrelated cosmos that we're all actively participating and dialoguing in together
Mm.
somehow, with the minerals, the plants, the fungi, animals, people, guardians, spirits, endless realms of relationship and influence, all interconnected. So thank you for that. That's very important, very beautiful. I have three last questions. They're all connected to this topic of relationship. I guess everything is. The first one is in terms all the way back. So you started by introducing yourself as, in terms of your artistry and creativity, being in relationship with that muse, the cosmic creative force, and being a vessel for that creativity of the universe to come through. And so clearly, artwork and music is a part of that. And I would imagine that parenting and having family is also a big part of being a vessel for the creative force of the universe as well. And so I know that there's other podcasts and things people can find where you go into some more depth on the journey and the experience of family life. But this is just an opportunity before we wrap up. One of the last questions is if there's anything that you want to add on what that initiation of becoming a vessel for the creative force of the universe in the form of family life has been for you, an artist in the world of having a home and a family. So any last reflections on that is the first one.
Mm. Well, I think that a lot of people would agree that it's one of the deepest initiations that we can walk in this life. And the ways that it comes are unexpected and very potent. Um, I would say that I feel extremely blessed to be a woman in this life and to be able to be a life giver and be the vessel for a physical form to move through me. I have experienced the process of birthing life through me, and I've experienced the process of birthing death through me as well. I've had both polarities, through birthing a live child and then also going through a pregnancy loss. And the it's almost hard to even put into words, but the great beautiful mystery that it is to touch the forces that are beyond this plane and beyond our understanding of what is life and what is death and what is consciousness and what is not, and the mystery that's encapsulated in that. There's a intrinsic transformation that happens that's like not something that can be pinpointed on one thing or another, and in many ways it's very mundane and ordinary. you know, and in other ways it's so deep and sacred and profound. And I can just say that I feel just so honored. I just like I'm in deep reverence and gratitude and honor to be able to have the capacity for that. And I know it's not for everybody, and I know it's not in everybody's capacity either. Those, even those that might want it, you know. And I would just say that there's many, many ways that we can initiate ourselves into the roles of family and the roles of parenthood and auntyhood and unclehood, and that it comes in the way that we, you know, we need it in this life. Um, that, you know, there's, I think for anybody who's like considering it, wanting it, scared of it, whatever that may look like, there's never like a right moment. You could sit there and wait for X, Y, and Z to be wrapped up and to have your, you know, ducks in a row and your all your things, and to feel ready. And it's something that you can never be fully ready or prepared for. And that's what makes it so special. It's because it's like an initiation that's beyond our capacity to control and to prepare for. And I think with those kinds of things is where we get the real deep lessons and teachings and the things that we really need, you know. So
Yeah, very helpful and inspiring. Thank you for
mm.
opening up all of that. My second question is also very related, no pun intended, which is the community. So community is like one big family. That's a place where a lot of uncling and auntying happens.
Mm.
And living not just in one little nuclear home, but being part of a whole solar system of homes and people that are living together, which is something that you experience with the land and the farm and other families and friends there in New York. So I'm curious if you could share any final thoughts as well about the larger family and the initiation of not just raising your own kids, but being a village, because I think that's where a lot of humanity is headed and everyone's dreaming about it and wanting it. And so just a few words of advice for people that might be interested in intentional or traditional village life of some sort that the world is sorely needing now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that believe that we're not meant to raise children alone, you know, and that was never the design. We were never supposed to be just an isolated singular unit, and that we require a tribe. It requires a village, you know, these cliches, these classic sayings that are just so true. And I had the blessing of being able to be one of 7 women that birthed our babies within a 6-month time period, and we all lived within a mile radius of each other. So going through that process and then having the ability to, you know, have our babies get together and like have some moms take a break while the other moms and dads, you know, stepped in, and you know, we all are exploring together what it looks like when one of the kids is, you know, being aggressive with another kid and they're fighting, and how do we want to approach that as a collective, because it doesn't actually work for one of us to be on one page and the other person to be on the other page. It works because it's inevitable. There's no way we could all ever agree on everything, but being in a community and raising kids together really invites a group practice in unifying our hearts and minds. And we actually just had a meeting this week of like all the parents getting together and with the intention of unifying our hearts and minds, going through the questions of like, what do we want to see for our kids? How do we want to see their education? What are our non-negotiables? What are, you know, our approaches to discipline? What are our approaches to education? What are our approaches to illness? Like all of the questions that are important to ask so that we act as one family, you know, and the children can build trust, whether they're with their mom or whether they're with their friend's mom or the auntie and uncle, whoever it is that they're with, it's consistent, it's
Mm.
safe, there's a
Mm.
container. And it takes a lot of work. It's a lot more work than if you were to just be with you and your partner, or you and your whatever significant other. It takes it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
We're learning what that looks like. We're in that process together. But it's so rewarding and it's so worth it. I mean, my son can just get up in the morning and walk across the street and be with his friends. And if his friends aren't home, he could walk next door and be with his other friend. And if that friend's not
Mm.
available, he walks,
Yeah.
40 feet, 100 feet down the road, and there's another friend. We have about 17 kids within, just like a 2-mile radius here.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty and value of that. And not only that, they're in nature. They're
Mm.
able to learn directly from the earth. They're learning practical skills of how to grow their own food and harvest their own food, of how to care for the earth, of how to care for animals, of how to cook and build things, and all of these, like, these practical life realities that it comes with day-to-day living. And it's so nourishing, and like I think every day, like, wow, I had a really great childhood, and what would it have been like if I was experiencing this, right? Like I think about all the differences and just like how blessed our children are to be growing up in that. And for those people that are wanting that and are maybe feeling like that's really inaccessible and that's really far away, it's not. I mean, maybe in the way that we're living, it takes a lot of extreme coordination and getting yourself in the right place in the right time. But even where you're at, just having the network, just making sure that you're creating it, whether you create it or you participate in it. If it's not there, create it. Create groups where parents can get together and talk about things, and have the kids play together, where you can go explore things together. You have a support system. It's so needed. It's so important. Reach out to your elders, to people in your family, to people who are closely connected to you that have the experience, and creating really solid networks and foundations for ourselves, and one step at a time. If that's your vision, if that's your goal, get there by starting with what's accessible and then moving from that place.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. It sounds to me like um, there's a certain intentionality that you're also describing with really contemplating ahead of time, like what are the needs, what are the values and principles, and that's something y'all are doing in a large community where you're getting together to have a clear, conscious outline of your intentions and so on. But then people who are seemingly isolated or don't have access to that same level of network can also begin by meditating on what are their intentions, what do they want to create, what does that look like, and then taking action towards it. And then I'm also hearing, even though it takes a lot of work and there's something that you have to give and then you get something in return, there's still this importance on taking the time to communicate is the other thing I'm hearing, that you guys do communication as a part of the relating and community building to figure it all out. So
You
thank
wouldn't
you for
believe how many
yeah,
meetings we have a week.
yeah, yeah,
With all the
exactly.
different parts, moving parts. It's a lot of talking.
Yeah, totally. And it's part of it. So that is part of it. And I also just want to ask one last question to close out here, which is all of this ultimately is part of, in this wild, wild world and society that we're living in, dreaming into reality, into existence, perhaps a more harmonious way of being on the planet in relationship with each other as a humanity. And so I just want to invite you to finish by, and of course, this is all connected, like the kids are the future generations of what humanity is going to look like, and it's likely that we'll need to transition into more conscious community and self-supporting, self-sustaining relationship with our resources and skills like you were just describing. So I just want to invite you to express, as we finish here, your prayers and visions for that collective paradigm shift on the earth that we're all going into, and what you hope that we can all make that look like, as opposed to some, other possibilities, this crossroads that we're at as a species in time.
Just seeing us moving from duality consciousness to unity consciousness, and watching that reflect in the polarity in the plane of existence that we're in, unifying our hearts and our minds to the same common visions and the same common goals, and seeing that it starts small and it starts simple. It's like think globally, act locally. So seeing our intentions, just taking care of each other, taking care of our families, our neighborhoods, our relationships, again coming back to the way that we relate to each other, and then the earth, being good stewards, and I feel like there's a lot of ways that things could go, and I don't want to be idealistic and fluffy in the sense that like we're gonna avoid some whatever is gonna happen, that we can bypass it, right? Because I am a strong believer in the process of labor and giving birth, and that is a messy process. Things need to fall apart in order to be rebuilt, and I think that the word that comes to my mind is like, have faith in the way things are, and the way things will be. And my prayer is that we can learn to trust ourselves and trust the process, and focus on creating small changes within ourselves and within our immediate environment. The rest of it, it's like you can't control a lot of things that are happening. It's like, just focus on what you have control over, which is yourself and your inner peace, and the way that you relate to everything, and how you take care of everything. And I just have a lot of faith that whatever process we're in, it is for our benefit, and we're moving through the wheel. And whether we who are speaking on this podcast and listening to this are the recipients of that benefit or not, maybe it's, after we're gone, and it's our children or our children's children or our children's children's children, just knowing that we can trust it. We can trust that we're here right now for a reason, and whatever it is that we go through, that we are in it together. And I don't know what that is. It's exciting. It's scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I see for us in the future is, that we will be in a more unified heart and mind, and that everything will reflect that through the relationships that we have, that we can be abundant, that we can be peaceful, that we can coexist, that we can be sustainable, that we all have exactly what we need, that everyone is taken care of and safe, and children are loved and seen and nurtured, and that everybody has respect, and that there is a vitality and a balance and a harmony and an equanimity, on the planet, and also within all things, within the cosmos, within all of existence, that there is harmony and respect and peace.
May it be so. Thank you, Ixchel, for sharing your prayers for humanity with us today and for living them in your own life every day as um, a vessel and of those prayers in your immediate surroundings. So thank you for that. And thanks for bearing with all my giant questions. It's just the way I ask them. But I set out the intention at the beginning that we'd have a conversation where we can pierce the surface and get into some depth. And I think that we've succeeded in that. So, yeah, again, just grateful. And until next time,
Thank you so much.
peace.
Peace.